Thank you all very much for being here. Sorry about the technical glitch where you can't see me at the moment, but Mike has done his hair, so thankfully we'll be looking at him most of the time. So I just wanted to really welcome everybody and say a very big thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your morning or day or evening or night, wherever you may be in the world, to be with us over this next hour or so. I was really excited when I saw that we have people who are joining us from all over the world. We have somebody from Colombia, obviously quite a few folks spread across the states, including my home state in California, some folks from Europe, including Poland and Spain and Portugal. So very exciting. And I think there was even somebody registered from Australia. I have no idea what time it is in Australia right now, but if that person did get up in the very early morning, then again, thank you for joining us. We are really honored and privileged to have you here. My name is Geoff Fisher. My current role, or my role at ISP, I've been at ISP for a little over 7 years. I was managing programs and traveling our programs mostly in our EMEA region for about 6 of those first 7 years. And then about 1.5 years ago, I stepped into a role where I'm now responsible for new ideas and new products within the company. That was going very comfortably and very nicely for about 1.5 years. And then this whole pandemic thing happened, and travel essentially got halted. So what was comfortable and nice, and we were slowly moving into the online space and online offerings to our universities and our partners and our students that we work with, that became something that was needed as soon as possible, as you can imagine. So really one of the reasons that we're doing this is because we want to talk a little bit about some of those options basically that we're working on. ISP's mission, if you will, is changing lives through education and travel. The travel part has, as we all know, come to a pretty abrupt halt. So we really looked at it as, we need to do as much as we can still within the education part of that mission. So that's a big part of the reason why, again, we have some of these online offerings that we're providing and that we're talking to people about. And the other part of it is really trying to help and trying to educate our friends and our partners at the universities that we work with. And again, that's a big reason why we are here today. I've worked with Mike and Deb from Texas A&M, who we'll be hearing from in just a minute. Worked with them quite a lot over those 6 or 7 years. And I was just having a chat recently with both of them, and Mike kind of threw out as I would say kind of a secondhand a thought. He said basically, if you have any clients, if you have any people that are really trying to figure out what to do with this kind of strange situation, maybe they've got a trip that's on the verge of being canceled or postponed, feel free to have them reach out to me. I'm happy to help them and see what I can do, see if I can kind of help people, navigate these strange waters. And so I took that kind of very generous offer. I took that to our marketing team and said, Mike has offered to help people. Is there anything we can do with it? And then we really came up with the idea of, hey, what if we do a webinar and invite people that, again, might be in need of some of this help. So again, thank you all for joining us. With that, I would just ask both Mike and Deb. Mr. Michael Alexander is the director of the professional MBA program at Texas A&M and a lecturer there. And Deborah Mann is the assistant director of the PMBA program at Texas A&M. So I would ask them if they don't mind to just introduce themselves and share some words on who they are and their program at Mays Business School.
Thanks, Jeff. Mike Alexander, director of the professional MBA. I am the poster boy for if you volunteer something, someone might say yes to you. Which is what got us here. Is just the friendly conversation between Jeff and I several weeks ago when we were figuring out what to do about our trip. Been director of the professional MBA for 8 years. Before that, so I graduated from our executive MBA, sister program to our professional MBA at Texas A&M. I spent 20 years in the advertising industry, most recently in business development, before coming here. Just a brief moment about our program, because I know you might want to compare your situation to our situation because some of our solutions might be different. We are a lockstep cohort professional MBA program, 50 to 55 students per year. It is a weekend program run about 100 miles from our campus in Houston. Sister program to our executive MBA. Our international trip is a part of a 3-credit-hour international business policy course. We run that international trip as required. It is late summer in the period between their first year and their second year, 8 days, and we rotate the location every year. As Geoff said, I'm here today primarily to help. The international experience is significant to our students, and it's personally significant to me. I believe in the value of international travel for the individual and for our cohort. And I have sort of a selfish sub goal of being here today. I also teach communication skills in another one of our programs, and I challenge our students to constantly gain new experience communicating. And so this was a challenge for me, is to present in this world in this new format and just try some stuff with Geoff and with Deborah. And also I'm a fan of ISP. We've done some really cool things over the last couple of years since we've known them. And so it was really easy to offer to say, hey, let's collaborate, let's help others, because that's sort of what we do in this industry. That's why I'm here, that's who I am. Deborah?
Thank you, Mike. Good morning or good day to all of you. My name is Deborah Mann. As Geoff said, I'm the Assistant Director for the Professional MBA program at Texas A&M University. Our program is based in Houston, although the main university is here in College Station, about 90 miles away. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Texas, and then I got out of here as soon as I could. I spent 16 years working in film production in Los Angeles. By the end of that time, I was thinking more clearly and realized how wonderful Texas is. And I returned home, and that's when I began my career in higher ed. Along with Mike, I've been with the program since its inception in 2012. Our students are fully employed professionals. They are also full-time graduate students. They have class every other weekend. As Mike said, the international trip is right in the middle of their program. Of course, it is a highlight of their experience. Like Mike, I am also passionate about travel and everything that brings to a person, individual travel, as well as bringing these opportunities to our students who have a wide range of backgrounds, some of them much more travel than others. What else about the program? Mike and I have a goal and a commitment in all aspects of the program to continuous improvement. Fortunately for us, as we have traveled the world with ISP for the past few years, they have really been a partner to us as we have evolved our international experience for our students.
Thank you to you both. And once again, we appreciate having you here and sharing your experiences and your insights. I just want to cover a couple of things very quickly before we get into the meat and potatoes of this. So just real quick, we are recording this webinar. We had quite a few people for various reasons that weren't able or aren't able to join us this evening, so we are recording it. Everybody who is here tonight, and including those folks that weren't able to join us, will be getting an email with a link to the recording, so you can see it afterwards if you'd like. As far as the agenda, we've got about an hour altogether. I'm going to start with just a couple questions for both Deb and Mike that'll kind of kick us off, and then we'll get into Mike will share with us kind of their process and how they've assessed and really tried to come up with alternatives for their essentially postponed trip that was supposed to happen in August. And we'll spend most of our time doing that. We will also have a kind of a group brainstorm for a few minutes where we will ask you to use the chat once again and share some of the factors and the things that you and your colleagues have considered as you are going through this process. And then we'll finish up. We've got about 10-15 minutes at the end that we've tried to save for a Q&A as well. So if any of those questions aren't answered, or if something else comes up that you would like to discuss, we'll have some time for Q&A. So that is the plan. In terms of questions, we've got the chat open. And again, just as a reminder, if you could change that setting on your chat so it's to all panelists and participants, then we can all see what we are asking each other. And if you do have any questions as we go through, feel free to just pop a question into the chat and we will do our best to answer it during the time or again, when we get to the Q&A. Lastly, we talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but we really do appreciate your time and energy being here. I think all of us who have been doing this quite a lot over the last, who knows how many weeks, 6, 8 weeks, what feels like forever now. These virtual meetings can be quite draining. So we will do our best to be done within that hour. And if we do finish early, then we will try to give you back some of that time so you can have at least a little bit of a mental break before your next meeting or engagement, if you will. So with that, I would ask a question to Deb, if I may. And Mike mentioned this already a little bit. We know from surveys that we've done, feedback that we get from students that the international trip, it really is it's a top 3 experience of any given program. It's a huge part of the what the students get out of a program and what the trip provides basically for them. So Deb, having known you over the years and your personality and your role at A&M, I mean, I know that your #1 priority is the students and their engagement in the program. Would you mind just talking a little bit about how your students have reacted to the possibility of their trip being canceled or moved, or just kind of how you guys are dealing with that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that they are dealing with changes in their international trip in a similar way that they're dealing with changes in all aspects of their education. And it's a bit different for every student. In terms of the trip, we have students who travel internationally every week for work. Some of them would probably like to hop on a flight today and go on their international trip. On the other side of things, we have a student who has 7 members of her family who has the virus. She probably wants to lock herself in a hermetically sealed room for the next 6 months. But overall, they were quite disappointed, as you can imagine, to find out that we are not traveling to Morocco and Portugal the first week of August. I would think the most important thing that we can do and have been doing for them is, as you know, ambiguity is really difficult for many people, and they are definitely looking to us for guidance on how to go through this process. And so that has probably been top of mind for us. We don't have all the answers, but we definitely need to be the leaders as we move forward and talk things through with them and give them, dole out information as we have it, and really guide them through this whole process.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's crucial, really everything that you said. And I think a lot of people here can probably relate to that process. I know I've had conversations with several of our guests over the last couple of weeks that, people are dealing with the same, essentially, program people are dealing with the same and trying to figure that out. And in that light, maybe I could ask Mike, would you mind sharing with us a little bit of the process that you guys have gone through in, from the time that, the trip was maybe hanging in the balance? I know your trip was just canceled within the last couple of weeks, or just really postponed within the last couple of weeks. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about the process that you guys went through in order to make the ultimate decision and get to a point where you felt like you were still doing right by the students given the circumstances?
Sure. So I think the key word there is process. The process that we use. I've noticed in my lifetime, and there's probably research somewhere that supports it, that when we get under pressure, whether we're applying that pressure to ourselves or whether that pressure is real externality, like Deborah mentioned, the pressure of uncertainty and ambiguity, or if that's the pressure of an entire cohort full of students looking back at you on a Zoom saying, but aren't we going to get to go? And when are we going to get to go? And what's going to change? When there's pressure like that, we often sort of make suboptimal decisions. And for me, following a process to slow everything down is really important. We realized, and we seem to have to learn this lesson over and over and over, but we realized when we were facing the question, are we or are we not going to go on the trip? If we don't go on the trip when we had planned to go on the trip, what are we going to do? when we were facing that question, we were all over the place. We were all over the place with possibilities and criteria and listening to individual voices. So here's the process. This is the process that we follow. It's figure out what question you're trying to answer first. Be really clear about the question. And then before you start finding the answer, generate all the possibilities for an answer. So this is the brainstorming step, the generate alternative step. So be clear on the question, generate a bunch of alternatives. And then even before you start judging the alternatives, list the set of criteria that you're gonna judge those alternatives against. So what are all the criteria that you need to think about? What equals success? The student point of view, the administrator point of view, the budget point of view. What are all those different criteria? And what this manifests in, Geoff, which I know we're gonna try one, is essentially something that many of us have seen before, but we forget to use it, and it's a decision matrix. This manifests in a decision matrix. So this is what we do. Deb and I do this, and we do this with our bosses, and we do this with some of our peers, is go through the problem solving process. And shocker, it's the same process that we teach our students in orientation as the process to use to manage themselves in the program and to answer things like, how do you answer case questions when you're doing your case prep? So that's how we do it generally. The key is, I think, Geoff, is to remember to fall back to a process when you're feeling pressure to make a decision. That's the key. Follow a process. Where would you like me to go from there, Mr. Geoff?
I think you have some idea where I would like you to go from there. I like the idea of this being very simple, and if you don't mind, I would ask you if you could share a story with our guest that you shared with me as well, about you and your wife using this very simple process to make a decision about a family decision that you had to make, because I think it speaks nicely to the simplicity of this.
Okay, so this is an example. So this is an example of how you might use the process in a completely different context. Just so you can see how the process comes alive. About a year ago, my wife and I are sitting in our garage, a little bit over that way in our house. We're sitting in our garage, and our daughter came to us. Our daughter is, at that time, 23 years old. She has a 1-year-old son, our grandson, and she's married to our son-in-law. So essentially, the three of them come to us and they say, hey, can we live with y'all? Can we live with y'all for 4 months, 6 months, maybe a little bit longer? And the reason we want to live with y'all is because you've been trying to teach us more and more about finances and about saving. And we think it would be a really good idea if we lived with y'all for 4 months or 6 months or longer so that we can save money for our future. So that's our question. Okay. We gave a non-committal answer and they left the house later. And my wife and I were all over the place. We were all over the place with different opinions and why the decision mattered. And so we were coming up with alternative solutions with coming up with what are the criteria that matter. So in the criteria, well, what about our own sanity? Well, what about their finances? What about our finances? What about the signal that we want to send them to help? But then we were also generating alternatives. Do we want them to live with us? Do we not want this? So it starts off as yes, no, right? Do we want them? Do we not want them? But are there other options here? Are there other ideas that so then we just stop everything, literally sitting in the garage. She's got a glass of wine, I've got a beer. And we said, why don't we just run through that quick little process? So first, what's the question? So we back up and we said, what's the question? And the question was, how do we want to help our kids? Not do we want them to live with us or not? It's how do we want to help our kids? And then we started generating alternatives. They could live with us. They could not live with us. We could help them pay their rent for a while, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we stopped that and we said, but what are we actually trying to get to? What are the measures of success? Well, the measures of success are their financial well-being, our financial well-being, our sanity, their young marriage. Is that a good thing or a bad thing relative to all this? So we went through all that. And the beautiful thing is, by going through the process, as commonly happens, we actually came up with a more creative solution. It wasn't yes, no. It wasn't helping them pay for things. It was a more creative solution. And we sort of fell back to our strengths. So we fell back to two things. Our strengths, what are she and I good at? And who's in our network that we haven't called on? Who can we reach out to? Because another thing we often do under pressure is we look at self and we say, well, I'm responsible to answer this question. So I forget to look out. So we came up with what we thought was a creative solution and it worked. And I don't even have to tell you what the solution is. The key is to follow the process to come to the solution, but I know you've got to have a resolve to the story, Geoff. And the resolve is, instead of them moving in with us or not moving in with us, we reached out to our network of friends and family in this town that we live in. We live in the same town with the kids. And we said, anybody willing to help us find them a really, really affordable place to live for the next year? It's temporary. It's a year, maybe 2. So that was part of the solution. And this is, so we helped them find a place to live and helped them find a much more affordable place to live. And then the second thing we did, we started working on a savings plan with them for the long term for them to buy a home. So that's not the question they asked us. Okay, that solution may not work for you. It may not be the right solution for you. The point of that story is, when we were all over the place trying to answer this question, we slowed down, we clarified the question, we generated a set of alternatives, we generated a set of criteria. How are we going to measure the alternatives? We measured them. And in doing so, we iterated a little bit. We came up with a more creative solution and we applied it. Now, that whole thing took us 10 minutes. It took us 15 minutes to come up with the idea, and then it took us a couple of weeks to execute. That's it. That's it, Geoff. That's the example.
I appreciate that. And now bringing that process and bringing that idea back to a potentially canceled international trip, how would you recommend that we go through and use this process? And can you take us through some of those steps to help some of our guests and colleagues who might be dealing with that exact thing right now?
So why don't I do this? Why don't I so first of all, I don't know if people are trying to take notes, but so can you see the problem solving steps, Geoff, on your screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this is the story I just told you. This is the steps that we followed. Is that we defined the problem, or we asked a clear question. In the story I told, the question was, what are we going to do to help our kids? In the real life of, if our trip gets canceled, if we can't travel, what are we going to do? So what are we going to do if the trip gets canceled? So we tried to ask the broad question. And then the steps that we follow: generate alternatives, determine some criteria, and evaluate those alternatives relative to the criteria, and then go do the thing that you decide to do. So, Geoff, I recommend, let's try it. Let's just try it right here. And is that okay, Geoff?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. All attendees, we're going to sort of assume we're in a room together, and there's 50 or 60 some odd of us. So this is probably going to get messy, and that's okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to generate alternatives. We're going to generate, so you're going to do this via chat. And you're going to generate alternatives, and here's the question. And I know this may not be the exact question for you, but hopefully this will be helpful, and you see the process. So we really want to help, and we want you to see the process. And the question is, if our trip gets canceled, what are we going to do? And so the step we're going to do right now is just generate alternative solutions. And you guys know this, it's brainstorming. So here's the rules of brainstorming. Don't judge anybody's idea, just blah ideas out. It's quantity that matters, quantity of ideas. The crazier the idea, the better, because that may not be the idea, but it may lead us to an idea. And very often, if we'll just listen to the ideas, we say, oh, and. So it's that improv technique of, and. You could do that, or you can generate an alternative based on someone's crazy idea. Therefore, if you're all willing, right now, generate alternatives. So in your chat to all panelists and attendees, what are the options if your trip gets canceled? Transition to a virtual platform. Reschedule, virtual. This is exactly right. Just keep coming. We're not going to judge at all. Take a trip via VR, AR. Organize a virtual. So we got virtual, postpone. So far I see 2 discrete ideas. Geoff, you're going to have to help me. These are going fast. Okay, we got another one, a new location. And that would probably be very similar to do something local. So far, postpone, virtual, new location, virtual options. Oh my heavens, these are fast. Virtual conferences. So virtual and loop in some foreign professors. Postpone plus give a plus to the trip. Oh yeah, postpone and add something to it. Using partner schools, run virtual team exercises, virtual company conferences, have my student teams work with yours. Oh, so yeah, partner up with another university across the water. encourage faculty to bring in guest speakers. So like do it marginally, do an international experience in bits. Okay, great. I think we can pause right there, but if you have more ideas, there's more. Connect with alums. So use the power of alumni, virtual experience in their regular time. And then also, so that's an and, virtual experience and a real experience later, maybe smaller. Local multinational company lectures, so bringing folks in, allow them to join next year. Okay, that's a creative one. Combine a couple of cohorts, and then we've got the hackathon online idea. Look for collaborations with International Student Services Office. So there's a beautiful one. That's Barbara. Barbara, essentially that's reach out to others to partner, to create ideas and to create possibilities. Okay, delete. Okay, so Rodney, that's always an option of sort of the option of do nothing, of yeah, we're just going to cancel it. And the great thing is right now in this phase, a lot of people just went, no, Rodney, no, we can't do it. No, you don't judge at this phase. You just get them up on the whiteboard or get them up in the spreadsheet or whatever. Okay, let's pause right there, Geoff. That's the phase of generate alternatives. And you can do that phase by yourself, with a buddy from another similar institution in a similar role, someone that's completely third party to the process that knows nothing, with a vendor. I know when I worked in the advertising business, when I would run into trouble or I'd run into mental roadblocks, I would often call a vendor because they knew our business, but they weren't in it. And so they didn't see all the noise and constraints that I would see. They would see it informed, but from outside. So that was always really valuable to me. Okay, pause right there. Geoff, are we good?
We are good.
I mean, that was really simple, right? We just generated a bunch of alternatives to the question, and then say they're still going. Lisa is still coming up with ideas. Okay, so then here's the next thing we do. Okay, so that was step 2, and now we'll do step 3. And step 3 is, what are the criteria that matter here? And Geoff, if I can find it, I already built us a little spreadsheet just to, do you see my little spreadsheet now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I have anticipated some of these ideas. Reschedule, there's Rodney, cancel completely, do something domestic, do some version of like a case competition, an online consulting project, an online other, ask for advice, and I kind of heard that as ask for advice partners. Okay, so that's the step we just did. Oh, and so, okay, we'll do that one. Combining cohorts. Okay, and then the next step, and you'll see across the top, I cannot type or spell today. Okay, so these are all our alternatives, and we could probably keep going and going and going and going. But now we have to ask, what are we judging those alternatives against? What is success? And this is the criteria for success. And the obvious one to me is this big one here, student engagement. So that's got to be a criteria for success, right? And then there's student learning, faculty buy-in, budget, safety. Is it allowable, approvable? Can you do it? Okay. And maybe there's others. Maybe you have different ideas, but here we're not only so remember, we're not only trying to help you sort of generate alternatives, we're also showing you this process that we use to figure out what's the right solution for us. And then once you get these on a grid of some sort like this, and you can do it in your head, you can do it on the back of a napkin, you can do it in a spreadsheet, now you've got to rate them. You've got to rate all your alternatives relative to the criteria. And a little tip here, I actually go criteria by criteria by criteria and look at the alternatives sort of to shock me. Instead of thinking about the idea, I think about the criteria. So let's do an example real quick. Student engagement. So we're really asking, is student engagement improved, lower, or stay the same relative to each of the ideas? So we're just going to walk our way down student engagement. And I know I have to make assumptions here, and I know these may not fit you, but I'm just going to talk you through my process. And I think I can do this in less than 2 minutes, Geoff. So student engagement, if we reschedule, well, rescheduling could lower engagement, but on net, I'm going to make the assumption that relative to do nothing, that's probably a good thing. Now, I'm going to rate these as 1, 0, or -1. That's just, I want to keep it really simple at this phase. 1, 0, -1. What if we cancel it completely? For the most of our students, yeah, that's going to be a real hit to engagement. What if we do a domestic trip? Yeah, that's probably an okay solution. You know, it doesn't quite have everything, but we'll just kind of call that a push for now. What if we do a case competition? Now, I think they're not going to think much of that because we do that already, but we could probably make something good about it. Now I'm going to break my own rule and I'm going to call that a 0.5. What if we did an online consulting project? Well, I don't know. We've never done that before, but I've heard people talk about it. They're not going to love it at first, but on net, I bet you, yeah, we could probably do something pretty cool there. So yeah, let's call that one. Yeah, I'm going to cheat there again and call it a 0.5. What about online other? Well, I don't know what that means. I'm going to call that a 0 right now. Boy, I probably have to get some help. What about asking for advice? Well, that's probably a really good process, and it's probably a really good reminder here, but is that going to help or hurt engagement? I don't know. That seems really weird to me, so I'll just call that 0 for now. And then what if I combine cohorts? Ooh, that could be really, really cool because that's kind of a thing they complain about anyways. They don't know each other. So for now, we're going to call that a 1. Okay, so then you would just do that across the whole thing, and you would look over there to the sum on the right, and then you would say, which one of those wins? Which one of those is the better idea? And then the fascinating thing to me is in doing that process, we often find additional alternatives. Oh, but what if we, and what if we, and what if we? So this list can grow. And we often then realize that our criteria either need to be weighted, like something is more important than the other, or maybe we have some criteria that don't matter because they're a push all the way down, or some new criteria. Okay, Geoff Fisher, I'm going to pause right there. And I'm going to say, do we need to respond to anything in chat? Where are we in our little webinar here? Reorient me, because I love this process. It is so simple. You can make it complex. You can make it meet your own need. But this is the decision-making framework that we follow. It's the one that we teach our students. And it's how we came to a conclusion about what we were going to do with our international trip.
I think this is a perfect place to pause, and there's a couple questions that have actually come up. One is the last one on that list, which I think is very valid for your process, basically for the process that you guys use. Vicky asked, are you seeking consensus across decision makers, or are you basically doing this process individually? How many people are you getting to do this process with you?
So Vicky, I'm going to answer you the way I do it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just going to answer you the way I do it. I usually do this process pretty closely held. I'll run this process with folks I trust to get to the big picture outcomes. Maybe that's my boss. Maybe it's often Deborah, our assistant director, because she gets it. Maybe it's with a student, but there's some risk in there. So I'll answer your question and say I typically do this pretty closely held, unless I need a specific insight or point of view, and then I'll consider that. But usually this is only a handful of people. But what this does for us is, let's say I didn't include my boss and he really likes data and really wants to see some clear thinking because he's a researcher. I could literally take him this spreadsheet, this method, and then allow him to change it. So I could get most of the way there and then say, and what do you think, boss? So that's an alternative. So I hope I answered your question. I usually do it pretty closely held, but then I can use the data. And once I have it built, then if I need to, if it's a really important stakeholder, I can let them give input and change the outcome. It gives them a starting point. It's a starting point for clarity of thinking. Geoff, what else we got? And I'm going to take this off my screen. Well, I'll just leave it there until you tell me to take it off.
Yeah, let's leave it for a couple minutes.
Yes, Vicky, 2 or 3 or 4 people is probably the most I usually see. Although I've seen this run with 10 or 12 people. When the question or problem has 10 or 12 gigantic stakeholders, they're going to have to get together to make it happen. Yeah. Collaborative rather than consensus. Yeah, I would agree with that. Any other questions or thoughts so far, Geoff?
Yeah, there was another one that came up. What was the ultimate decision that you guys made for your trip? So you were supposed to travel in August of this year to Morocco and Portugal. What did you guys ultimately decide once you went through this process?
The ultimate decision that we came to, and I'll tell you why first, is we thought it was the right outcome for student learning. We thought it was the right outcome for student engagement. And we frankly thought it was the right outcome for long-term marketing. Is we want to maximize student engagement because, as many of us know, taking care of this group has effect on the next group and the next group and the next group. And so the ultimate decision we came to was postpone the trip. So we rescheduled. We were supposed to travel in August. We worked with the university and looked at when do we have a high probability of being able to go? When will it fit our schedule? And then in that process, we knew we were going to disappoint a few people. So literally we had a couple of students that said, well, now I might not be able to go. On net, when we looked at all of our criteria, the net of, so if we had a criteria of each individual student engagement, we basically found some negative ones because we had some individuals that might not be able to go. But relative to the big picture of optimizing a decision, so the answer is we rescheduled for January and we kept the locations the same. We did that, frankly, for simplicity. And maybe that's important here, Geoff. Maybe it's not, you tell me, but, and Deborah could even talk to this, is we allow our students to have a huge voice in where we go, and they had already had that voice. We saw no reason to change that.
And it's a good point, actually, and that leads me to another question that came up. Rodney asked, you know, once you made that decision, and it might be a question for Deb as well, how did you guys get student buy-in with that decision? How did you ultimately either involve them in that process or just inform them and get them to buy into what you had decided?
Okay, so I'll admit something to you that we didn't do that very well. And we learned a really important lesson. We felt compelled to tell them as fast as we knew the answer. And our reasoning was the sooner we tell them, the sooner they will have certainty in their life within the 2 years of our MBA program. So we were sort of compelled by creating certainty. What we didn't do that I wish we had done, and we had to do it in the moments after we announced the decision, was we had to explain our process. So we literally had to explain what's on your screen right there, and sort of, and the metaphor that I used was, hey, you've all taken statistics and you have learned constrained optimization. This was a constrained optimization problem for us. Deb and I have solved it on your behalf. We didn't involve you because you just don't need the cost and to bear the burden and all the noise, but we will tell you some of the constraints in the optimization so that you can know we got to a good solution. So my advice would be, if you follow the metaphor of a constrained optimization, is let your students know the constraints you were dealing with so that they can see and trust that you came up with the best solution, even though the best solution has some cost. So that, I don't know, if Deb, if you want to add any color, if we had slowed down and give them the constraints first, we repaired that. But the key is we told them as fast as we could, which I think we did okay there. And second, what we didn't do that we had to sort of repair is tell them the constraints, describe to them the process so that they could feel like they had been part of it, because they were also feeling a sense of loss. We were very inclusive and we didn't include them in the decision. And I'm okay with the fact that we didn't include them in the decision because there was a lot of political noise at the university that we didn't want to expose them to.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not entirely sure it was a mistake the way we did it. I think that, sorry, dog drinking in the background. That's what happens when you work in your dining room. I think either way it was precarious. And like Mike said, there was a little bit of dissatisfaction. You know, I'm not in the habit of talking to students and explaining the bureaucracy that we live in and all of the limitations. Like, I just feel like it's my job to handle those things and they don't need to know about all of them. But yes, in this case, perhaps explaining some of those and sort of letting them behind the curtain a little bit might have not made it seem like we just blindsided them and went directly from the problem to the solution without their input.
Yeah, and you know, I see like Dr. Thompson and Nina, you know, so essentially some of these ideas that are still coming are questions that are still coming. In broad strokes, the way I would handle many of these things is I would ask myself, are those alternatives? So are these options? Or are they criteria? So where do these questions or ideas fit? So I'll use Dr. Janice Thompson. Did you think about making your trip the culmination of a 2-year MBA? We did. So that would have been one of our alternatives. And then relative to student engagement, I'll tell you for us, it didn't score as high as doing the trip during the time. So we consider doing it after. And frankly, maybe we're going to be forced to do that. To Eva's point, well, what happens if we have to push it again? But when we looked at student engagement, which we gave extra weight to, student engagement and student learning, we know that we believe that student engagement and student learning is going to be higher during the 2 years instead of even immediately after. So the big picture there is your question, I think, when you have an idea or another thought, is it an alternative? Is it one of the criteria? And then how does it fit in your decision? And what you just saw me do, where I put all that on a little spreadsheet, that very often happens iteratively, where you add alternatives or add criteria or take away criteria. It's an iterative / sloppy process, and it's still a process to follow to help clarify your own thinking. And then again, if you have to explain that to students or maybe to an administrator somewhere, you can literally say, this is what we came up with. What do you agree with or disagree with?
There's a couple of questions. One from Linda and then the red below from Nina. Basically around the uncertainty, and you guys very well may be in that same situation. You've rescheduled for January, but we don't know what's going to happen over the next few months, and we don't know what's going to happen going into January. So let's say you've got to make another decision. You've got to deal with that uncertainty. How will you guys do that at that point?
So I can. This is going to be a letdown of an answer, but I can clearly can tell you conceptually how we'll do it. We'll do it the same way, and the same way means we will go through panic. We will freak out over our own responsibility. We will try to come up with the magic bullet answer because we'll feel under pressure of new information that something has gone wrong. And then doing all that, we'll stop at some point, 24 hours later, 4 hours later, 4 minutes later, we will stop and say, should we follow that process again? Should we ask the clear question, generate a set of options? To Vicky's point, ask ourselves who needs to be involved in the option creation and the criteria creation. And maybe at that point we do engage the entire cohort or representatives of the cohort. Maybe we tweak the who's involved, which is another variable that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about. But then we would follow that same process. We would do some brainstorming, trying to find an optimal solution relative to the constraint / criteria. That's what we would do. Knowing, and I think this is strange and ironic that this keeps coming up in a lot of conversations I have lately, is knowing that there are still going to be people disappointed. I think with something this important for us, even, and maybe this is a limitation to my own thinking, but even the most optimal solution is probably still going to disappoint people. And that hurts. Maybe you can ask a really brilliant question is, can we find a solution that doesn't disappoint anyone? And that could be, and I would set that as a criteria. I would put that up there in the criteria. What's the solution that doesn't disappoint anyone? And Rodney, so Rodney just asked a question, Geoff, have you started looking at non-trip options? I think the great thing about us following this process over the last, so we completed this about 2 weeks ago. It took us about a month to figure out what are we going to do. By doing that, we have a much more clear list of the options. So frankly, so here's the example. I didn't know that ISP was working on options for universities that can't take their trip. I didn't know that. And so by involving Geoff in our brainstorm and saying, well, we think we're going to change the trip to here, but what do you think? And he tells me about some additional options. Well, now I know those things. So because I followed this process, I now know those. Those should help me next time. Because the farther we go, the lower the probability of us being able to take and reschedule the trip. Therefore, yeah, knowing that, oh, there is an online alternative or a hackathon, or hey, we can get speakers from out of the country. Let's find a couple of faculty who are willing to integrate those in their courses, as well as doing a weekend case competition with a couple of real companies from Morocco. So knowing that those options exist because we ran this process will make next time should become a more elegant solution, even if not perfect, because we know more.
There's also a question from Daniel about how best to communicate a future program under the situation of uncertainty. So I'm thinking this is more for future cohorts and what the future will look like. Are you guys dealing with that at all right now for incoming cohorts or future cohorts, or not, basically?
Wow, Daniel, ask a hard question, why don't you? I can tell you what we're doing. So not relative to international trips. But we are talking to our incoming cohort about some things. And so this is a separate process, but here's my process. I tell them what we know. I tell them what we don't know. I tell them what our current plan is. And sometimes I will reveal that we're also working on backup plans, but I rarely reveal what those are. Frankly, personally, I just rarely reveal what those are, because then we start into, now all of a sudden we have a consensus problem. So I tell them what we know. I tell them what we don't know. I tell them what our current plan is. And if needed, I tell them that we're working on backup plans. And in doing that, we're often asking for trust. And so hopefully we've built some of that via relationship, via activities that we've done in the past. If you've got some trust credit in the bank, I think it can really help you in that situation, Daniel.
I think there's a conversation going on also about, just generally the disappointment that, a lot of the students are going to take. And, unfortunately, it's the reality that we're in. And that's what really, that we at ISP, that's what we're trying to supplement to some extent as much as we can. I think we are of the same mindset and of the same mentality that the international experience is a extremely valuable and extremely enriching experience, and whatever we can do to provide some of that through some of our offerings, whether it's virtual online content or consulting projects working with international companies, that's something that we are definitely moving towards, and we hope that at least in these strange times it can offer some of that international exposure a little bit. So if anybody's interested in talking about that, please let me know at any point.
Geoff, I think that's a good point. So, and I'm glancing at the chat here, and I see some questions about tuition.
Yeah.
I'll give you a word of warning about following the problem-solving process. Is you have to be clear on the question, and in the question you can't accidentally have the solution. So, if your question was, "Hey, our trip has canceled. Should we or should we not give some money back?" I will tell you, and I've had to learn this lesson the hard way, wrong question. Question is, if our trip has canceled, what should we do? Because if you say, should we or should we not give money back, you've limited yourself to two options. If you say, we've had to cancel our trip, what should we do? You now open yourself up to additional options. And if you will follow some of this process, especially by asking a couple of people, which is exactly what I had done with Geoff. Hey, Geoff, what if we have to cancel the trip? I didn't ask Geoff whether or not we should give money back. I asked Geoff, hey, we're thinking about doing this. You got anything else? And that's when he started telling me about, he started very, very on the surface, told me a little bit about, hey, don't forget, if everything goes to hell, we have some alternatives for you. And they're not giving money back. They're about creating experience. Now, I may still have the question of, do I need to give money back? And now I can separate that as a separate question.
And then, yes, you have to deal with those students who talk to their peers, and maybe some institutions are giving money back, maybe some aren't. I think that's complicated.
It is,
and I wouldn't know how to navigate that either.
Well, and I'll tell you, we've dealt with that related, and what we keep going back to is what you really came for here was an education and an experience, and we're still committed to doing that. So the why still exists. So why? We still believe in the why. We might have to change the how. But if the how meets the why, then the kind of money doesn't exist. And I know when you're dealing with that, when you're staring you right in the face, it's not that easy. But I even think with our international trip, like I love that someone had the alternative of, well, why don't you combine two solutions? Why don't you do like a weekend case thing or a hackathon or a quasi-international experience online, and give them the option to come back with the next cohort, and give them the option to do an alumni trip. And solutions are often beautiful solutions, but we don't find those and solutions when we often don't find those and solutions when we're under pressure because pressure prevents creativity. And I think by following a process and by finding a couple of other folks to talk to Vicky's point, who do you talk to? Well, maybe I find someone I trust that has a similar experience or has the same outcomes in mind. And maybe that's a buddy internally. Maybe that's a buddy externally, like Geoff. I mean, Jeff's been our program manager on 3 of our 7 trips, something like that, a lot. So Geoff and I spend a lot of time together, so we know each other. So there's trust built up. So finding people to talk to unleash your own creativity. My goodness, you guys did it right here in the chat.
Yeah, I wish we could connect some of you that could continue to help each other and answer some of each other's questions. Well, if you'd like to, again, let us know. We probably could do that. We are running out of time. We've got, say, 8 minutes left. Is there anything, well, I guess one more question from Rodney, and then I will probably close it out with that. And Rodney asked, did you talk to other program leaders at other institutions, you know, to your point of seeking advice or finding thinking partners?
So the short answer to that is yes. I find in this industry something really valuable, and that is I've got a handful of really trusted counterparts at other universities that I often just call up, and my normal process is quick chat or quick call with them individually. I think of them as my board of directors or my council, and I actually have 2 or 3 different subsets depending on the subject. But I know the couple of people that are as invested in us as the international trip, and so those are the people I reached out to and said, what are you thinking? What's going on with you? Help me unleash some creativity. So the short answer is absolutely. I talk to peers and insiders and vendor suppliers. That's my go-to list, not necessarily in that order, but that helps me spur some creativity and get out of my own head in following this process. So yes, Rodney. Geoff, right. What else can I do for the good of the order, or should I turn the floor back over to you, sir?
I think you have done more than we could have asked you for. So I will ask one more thing of our participants as we were just getting ready to finish up here. If you don't mind, if you could share with us in the chat again, as you've all been using the chat very nicely, if you could share with us maybe one thing that you've either learned or one thing that you'll take away from this, this time with us. Again, our mission is changing lives through education and travel, and we would like to educate ourselves of, you know, if this has been helpful, basically. And if we can do something else like this, if we can potentially, you know, improve on it and continue to try to educate and try to help people like yourself. So if you don't mind, maybe just sharing with us something that you've learned, something that you've taken away from this time, maybe your justification to your colleagues or boss, how you've spent an hour of your Wednesday.
I like Lisa's. Lisa says openness to collaborate, learned about the openness to collaborate. I think of that as get out of my own head. And I will say that I don't even know who it was, but the and solution, I honestly often forget about and solutions. Well, we can do this and this, and that's what creates the value.
Rodney asks if the chat responses will be available to us. Rodney, I will look into that. To be very honest with you, I have no idea if we can do something about that, but I'll look into it. And if we can, then yes, we will share them with you.
Yeah, some of these other takeaways, coming up with a framework. So following a process, yes. Writing out the decision matrix. Sometimes you can do this publicly on a big whiteboard. That can make a huge difference. Pressure prevents your creativity. So find a talking buddy. For those of you, can you guys tell, I think by talking, yeah, you've got to do that. Hey, Geoff, as those are still coming in, I do want to take a second and say thank you. Thanks for letting us just share some of our experience. And the reality is I came to help. I also came selfishly, wanted to try to present in a new form, but I have a number of trusted colleagues. To Rodney's question, I have trusted colleagues, and the way I've gotten those trusted colleagues is exactly by this, by presenting at conferences, by getting to know them, by finding similarities or differences, and then creating a relationship so that we can help each other. So I find this forum really valuable, and I'm assuming that when I come out of this, I'll get a couple of LinkedIn pings, and I'll have a new group of trusted colleagues. Thank you, Geoff.
No, and we obviously and absolutely thank you as well, Mike, for sharing your time and your insights. I think all of us have certainly learned something and taken away something. And Deb as well, don't want to forget about you as you've been answering questions also in the side chat and sharing your experiences and insights with us. thank you to you both. And thank you to all of you that have joined us. And again, taking the time out of your day to spend now almost exactly an hour with us. So as I mentioned, we will be sharing the recording with everybody, so you can look back to it, and we'll see what we can do about the chat. Also, Vicky had a point about maybe consolidating some of the answers even for us at ISP, so we can take that to our own people and try to communicate and share some of those answers and ideas and solutions and stuff. So once again, thank you all, and especially to you, Mike. Thank you for your time, your energy. You are much appreciated, sir.
Thanks, Geoff. Talk to you later.
Yep. Thank you, guys.